Hi, I'm Ashley.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Lindsay.
We're your hosts at Pineapple Pizza Podcast, where we cook up fresh and flavorful weekly specials of mythology,
cryptozoology,
and urban legends inspired by regions around the world.
If you're craving history, world culture, strange and obscure stories, and a dash of inappropriate humor, join us for a bite every Sunday.
You can find us on all major streaming platforms.
Come for the laughs.
Stay for the flavor.
Darkcast Network. The light shines brightest on our indie podcasts.
Before we begin this week's episode, I'd like to start with a content warning. This podcast includes foul language and includes discussions of violent crimes. Some topics may be triggering and may include depictions of sexual assault, gore, torture, suicidal ideation, or discussions of mental health. Listener discretion is strongly advised. Some claim that he was one of the more prolific serial killers, and others don't even know who he is. Some even believe that when we're talking about Tony Costa, we're actually referring to Tony Costa, the Spanish Zumba instructor and dancer, but far from it.
We are actually revisiting the case of Tony Costa, who is also known as the Cape Cod Casanova, the Cape Cod Vampire, and even some cases, Tony Chop Chop Costa. We are revisiting this case, like many others, because we feel like we want to do a better job describing the incident and paying respect to the victims without all the BS.
I mean, I still maintain that he looks like he had halitosis. I don't know why, but it's just a feeling I get.
Yeah, well, look at Richard Ramirez.
True.
People thought he was hot, but didn't people also compare his breath to that of a dead dog in period blood?
Yeah, exactly. That's my point. The whole point of this episode will be to never judge a book by its cover.
With that, what do you call a typo on a tombstone? A grave mistake. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Amanda Cronin.
And I'm Courtney Fenner. And A Nefarious Nightmare presents Through the Woods of Truro, Tony Costa.
I'm going to open up with our missing segment. Shaniece Harris was born February 2nd, 1986, and was last seen in Rock Hill, New York, in Sullivan County on May 29th, 2017. She was visiting a friend's house and has not been heard from since. According to her mother, Elvia Crump, quote, "I was worried and fearful because that's not like her at all. She doesn't even like to sleep at her sibling's house, let alone never come home," end quote. Shaneice is described as a female of color with brown eyes and brown hair, approximately 260 pounds and 5'8". Harris has a tattoo on her right hand on the top that reads Sparkz with a Z at the end, and a tattoo on her left arm of hands folded in prayer that reads Rest in Peace. She was known to frequent areas in Middletown and Monticello, New York. Quoting this from the source we listed at the top of the show notes, Crump says she didn't receive any updates or information from the police about her daughter's case. She says she wants them to treat her case as if they were her own child missing. Do what you would do for your own because she is somebody's child. She is mine, Crump said, and I'm only asking what any other mother would want. I do not want to go on not knowing what happened to my daughter. It's not right and it's not fair, end quote. The FBI is offering a reward up to $10,000 for information leading to an arrest in this case. Anyone with information about Shaniece Harris or what may have happened to her is asked to call the FBI New York office at 212-384-1000. You may also contact your local FBI office, the nearest American embassy or consulate. You can also submit a tip online at tips.fbi.gov. Without further ado, let's get into the case of Tony, the Cape Cod Vampire.
Tony Costa was born August 2nd, 1944 in Cambridge, Massachusetts, to Cecilia Bonaviri and Antone Finesca Costa. His father died in World War II when Tony was just an infant. I think he was maybe 6 or 7 months old. I remember reading that somewhere, but his dad passed away in a heroic effort of saving his shipmate from drowning. He ended up banging his head on a coral reef and drowned himself after, I guess, suffering a concussion underwater. Sad, yes, because his dad died before young Tony had the capacity to even remember him.
At the age of 7, he started claiming that his father was coming to visit him in his room at night. It wasn't confirmed until much later when Tony had identified him in photos as the man who visited him. There were no other mentions of these nighttime visits. It is also said that Tony was a spoiled brat. At the age of 13, his stepfather owned a masonry business, and Tony was in charge of bookkeeping and business correspondence side of that.
In high school, he started showing sociopathic signs in his mid to late teens. Small animals started going missing around the neighborhood. At 16, he broke into the apartment where a female classmate had lived. It's unclear if it's actually a classmate. I'm just using that term as, an age reference. But she was a teenager. This was a girl that he had, quote-unquote, tied up 2 years prior just playing, fooling around, Boys will be boys. And I really, really hate that term. Boys will be boys.
The first time he broke into her apartment, he'd stand over her bed and stare at her until she woke up screaming. He'd run off because she'd spooked him. A few days later, he did the same thing and at the same place with the same classmate. Only this time, he attempted to drag her down to the apartment's basement. The attempt was failed because some neighbors who were privy to this came and intervened.
Now, I believe they were already privy to this because the girl had complained about this the first time, and people were already on high alert for some weirdo coming into the apartments and staring this sleeping would-be victim down. Then, January 4th, 1962, he was convicted of burglary and assault for this case and received a suspended 1-year sentence and 3 years of probation. He was sent to live with some family members in Provincetown, Massachusetts, where he finished up high school.
Let's talk Provincetown real quick. Provincetown was also known as P-Town, so going forward, we mean Provincetown when we say P-Town. P-Town was also described as quote-unquote wash ashore. It's a small historical fishing community and also an arts district. It's been said that P-Town was post-Vietnam freak culture during the 60s and 70s, and that there's a lot of pot, LSD, and speed going around. It was always a big party. Fishermen and hippies would pass each other by and respect each other's spaces and do their own thing.
Tony was considered very handsome, but weird, like something was off. He had a thick mustache, sideburns, and considered himself an intellectual. He also had a hobby, which was taxidermy, and around the time he had this hobby, cats were going missing. He often drove around at night collecting roadkill and bringing it home to perform taxidermy.
At the age of 18, in April of 1963, Tony married a 14-year-old girl by the name of Avis, whom was described as submissive, and they had 3 children together. Gonna toss a quick moral compass your way and say, on one end, it's only 4 years difference, but on the other end, it's still a full-grown ass adult age of 18 and a straight-up minor.
Avis and Tony had 3 children. The first 2 were boys, which Tony didn't shy from expressing disappointment in that fact, but then they had a 3rd child, a girl whom they named Nicole, and Tony was just overjoyed by that and called Nicole his pride and joy. Around this time, he was a handyman and a carpenter, also hung around with teenagers. He saw himself as their big brother and also as their Jesus. It was as though he was trying but failing to start a cult, and the problem is that he wasn't near as charismatic and convincing or even as smart as he thought he was, which is found out in several stories that he claimed to have this really high IQ, but it turned out to just be an average IQ.
He began using drugs and engaging in some bizarre behaviors and seriously strange sex acts with this 14-year-old bride. Quick thing, again, this is not to say BDSM is a bad thing. Kinks are fine. The thing about this is, evidently their sex life had changed so drastically which is already its own red flag most of the time without it being a murder case. I mean, sometimes a change in sex life is a good thing, but when it happens out of the blue and without any communication involved, it's not necessarily a good thing.
Yeah. Usually it just suggests lesser egregious acts like, affairs, which could technically lead to murder, but also while this isn't exactly snapped or women who kill, in this case, it's still quite a bit more nefarious than it seems.
Now, let's talk about his garden. Around this time, he also had a garden that everyone knew had pot. He often took girls over to this garden, which was located down a dirt road behind a cemetery in Truro, called a Pine Grove Cemetery, to impress and woo them.
Yes, I won't go too much into detail about that. Basically, he had this little posse of chicks that were underage. They all just kind of fawned all over him, so he called them his quote-unquote kid chicks. He was only 22 when his marriage had started to crumble, assumed because of his drug use, but I'm also going to point out that they both were very young and marriage doesn't typically, work. It was around June of '66 when he told his wife Avis that he's headed to California and that on the way, he was going to drop 2 hippie chicks he'd met off to Pennsylvania. These 2 women were Diane Federoff and Bonnie Williams. Nobody had heard from either of these 2 ever again.
Truro Woods is a lush forest-like area near P-Town where Tony would escape reality and build his little marijuana empire, impress his friends and quote-unquote kid chicks, and also do more sinister things. Tony one day decided that it was a pleasant day to go hiking in Truro Woods with a girlfriend. This was August of 1967. He was 23. I suppose he was trying to take her to his little garden to woo her, so in an act of romance, he decided to play Cupid and literally shoot her with an actual arrow to express his undying love. She survived that incident, and Tony claimed it was an accident. On a real note, we have searched everywhere for who this woman is, but couldn't find anything. Nonetheless, I'm super glad that she made it out of this alive.
His marriage is completely falling apart at this point, and Avis is pretty much like more of a roommate and seeing this as a roommate situation. Avis, while most wouldn't consider her one of his victims, was actually a victim. It's largely unknown how exactly she feels about Tony in the present day, but she was practically manipulated by Tony in the first place. She wasn't complicit in his crimes or anything. She was young and impressionable and put on her own victim situation. She likely didn't leave because of fear. That, and they had 3 kids and had married young, still a lot to learn in life, and while unfortunate, Avis is not the bad guy here. Anyway, it's 1968 at this point. Tony is around 24 years old. He bounces once again to San Francisco, moves in with a new girlfriend named Barbara Spalding. By all accounts, Barbara had to leave to drop her child off to her parents' house. Tony left at this time back to Massachusetts. Barbara was never seen again. In May of that same year, 1968, Tony is hired as a handyman at a doctor's office. From what I understood it to be, the owner of the doctor's office's daughter, who worked there as a receptionist, and Tony would flirt back and forth. At one point, Tony was working on the paint on the trim of one of the windows when the doctor came to Tony and told him to stay away from his daughter. Not long afterward, around $5,000 worth of medical supplies and drugs came up missing from that same office. It would be found out later that, of course, Tony was the one who stole these missing supplies and drugs.
After the doctor's office burglary, 18-year-old Cindy Monson, who was believed to be a girlfriend of Tony's, leaves for a party and goes missing. Everyone assumed she had just left, and it wasn't uncommon for what's known as, quote-unquote, the hippie movement, for people to basically bounce around from place to place and disappear and then reappear elsewhere. It would be 3 weeks before her family reported her missing. Her sister thought she went to Europe.
So now it's August of 1968, and he and Avis officially divorce. Tony, after maybe 1 or 2 minutes of nursing his heartbreak, sarcasm, now has rebounded and has a new girlfriend named Susan Perry. They shack up together, and then she disappears. Tony tells authorities that she went to Mexico. That's always the excuse. They went to Mexico. A few weeks later, he's arrested for driving without a license and then failure to pay child support. Sounds like a real catch, right? In the book, The Babysitter, which, will be referenced in the show notes, it said that Tony didn't give a single solitary fuck about those kids, though he liked to dote on them in their absence to impress people. So he's held in custody until November of that same year, 1968.
Tony starts dating Christine Gallant, who he shares drugs with. She is found dead a few weeks later. It said face down in her bathtub. The death was ruled an overdose and drowning, but it's believed that she was one of Tony's victims because she was face down instead of face up and had fallen asleep.
Yeah, so it's a theory that I still stand by, but I firmly believe that he killed her because it's hard to believe someone would be like, hey, I'm gonna bend over this bathtub and just, put my head underwater. Even if the person were on drugs, it would be a lot more likely of an accidental drowning if you had fallen asleep taking a bath. Just a regular bath where you're laying on your back. But I'm still gonna die on this hill. Tony Costa killed her.
January 24th, 1969, Patricia Walsh and Marianne Wysocki take a trip to Cape Cod in their Volkswagen Bug. They rent a room in a cottage in P-Town, which is the same place that Tony rents a room. In the book, it is referenced that the owner of this place was a bit unconventional and a little naive, but paranoid, which is fine. If a murderer were a silent ticking time bomb, she was sitting on top of one. She had absolutely no idea what was going on. Her thought process had simply been, we aren't getting a revolving door here and I haven't seen any new tenants, so why not? Rent isn't gonna pay itself.
So Tony goes all night in shining armor here, and he helps the girls with their bags and all that, is very polite, acted like a complete gentleman. They became fast friends and hang out together for a few nights, partaking on that Mary Jane. They disappear, and Tony moved out the day they disappeared, which that's what you're supposed to do if your roommates vanish. You gotta move out.
Love that sarcasm. A body was found to be cut up into 8 pieces in mid-February of 1969 behind the old Truro cemetery. The body was confirmed to be that of Susan Perry. March 4th, possibly following up on this, the bodies of Patricia Walsh and Marianne Wysocki and Sydney Monson were found almost 2 miles from where Susan Perry was found. We are going to take a quick break here, and then Courtney will start with the victims.
Hi listeners, I'm JT, your host for Crime Trials. We are an investigative true crime podcast examining the depraved minds behind the most heinous acts of malice. If you like documentary-style true crime shows with immersive primary source audio, straight from the courtroom, then we are the show for you. We break down motives, evidence, and legal strategies behind past and current high-profile criminal trials. We take you into the mind of the defendant through direct and expert testimony. We review the pre-trial motions and discuss the most compelling evidence introduced at trial. We also cover the evidence deemed too prejudicial for the jury to hear or consider. We explain the legal arguments behind those decisions and discuss how it might have changed or influenced the verdict. Join us at Crime Trials on your favorite podcast player of your choice.
Are you looking for a new adventure? Did you ever want to visit the city where all your nightmares reside? Well, you're in luck. Join us, your tour guides, Christine and Jen, to visit Nopeville, where you will be personally escorted on an all-inclusive trip through the city and see all possibilities of terror and fright.
You'll see all sorts of things on your tours, including, but definitely not limited to, the paranormal, true crime, the supernatural, and more. If you're into all that and enjoy a little dark humor, book your tour today and nope right along with us. Check us out on our website at nopevillepodcast.com to see where you can listen to Nopeville today.
Welcome back, everyone. Okay, So I have separated this into believed victims and confirmed victims because I really wanted to remember all 8 of them as well and, give some insight as to who they were and what they were like. But unfortunately, not a lot is available on the unconfirmed 4. However, I do want to include them here because, to be honest, I feel that all 8 of these women died by the hands of Tony Costa.
Here are the believed victims. Diane Federoff and Bonnie Williams. We had mentioned them before. There was also Barbara Spaulding's, detectives believe murdered. Tony Costa was never charged due to lack of evidence. Unfortunately, no information on the 2. And Christine Gallant, possibly, but death was ruled as a drowning and overdose. Unfortunately, we could not find anything further.
And now for the confirmed victims. The first one is Sydney Monson. She was born July 20th of 1949. She was nicknamed Snid, and she died just 2 months shy of her 19th birthday. She graduated Nauset Regional High School in Orleans, Massachusetts. She was bright, intelligent, and inscribed on her grave is, quote, lived each second to the fullest. You can see in the pictures that she was very friendly and sweet, and was very involved in both her school and social life.
The next is Susan Perry, Tony's new girlfriend after he and Ava's divorce. She disappears after they move in together. Tony tells authorities that she bounced out to Mexico. She was born October 15th, 1950, and passed away September 10th, 1968, just 1 month shy of her 18th birthday. She is described on the source we are citing in the show notes as a, quote, sweet but troubled girl who made a difference. And she was a lost and lonely girl who was murdered by a serial killer, Tony Costa, end quote. There's a quote also I am having a difficult time understanding, but it reads, quote, a maid for whom there was a few to love and very few to praise, end quote. I'm assuming that since her parents had divorced 2 years prior, that maybe she was kind of having a hard time with that, and people were seeing her as sad, but also like a servant's heart, a people pleaser. I'm gonna say, if I had to rewrite any of it, that she was a beautiful soul with a servant's heart and would do anything to make those around her feel warm and loved. Someone left a comment on her Find a Grave page that actually made me cry. Quote, Susan, I was listening to a song the other day from 1966 called Love is a Hurting Thing. I'll bet you love that song. Throughout most of your life, you hurt. It must have been wonderful to be in a place where you don't hurt anymore. I hope I get to meet you there someday, end quote.
Next is Patricia Walsh. She was born in 1945 and died February 1st of 1969. She was a school teacher, and she was either 23 or 24 when she passed away. Her yearbook photo, the description reads a quote from Stanislaus, quote, good humor is the help of the soul. She actually gave me a vibe, and you hear it in the original episode, that, she could have been on SNL at some point if she hadn't been murdered. If you read further on her yearbook photo, it says that her activities included bowling, swimming, skating, French club, cage ball, and she was part of the Junior Alliance. Also, she had been known for a quote, me, blush, which further suggests that this woman had an amazing sense of humor. And the last is Marianne Wysocki. She was born in 1945 and died February 28th, 1969. At either 23 or 24. She was a college student. She also had a yearbook photo, and that quote was from William Blake, quote, formed of joy and mirth. Her activities included bowling, swimming, skating, also cage ball, and Junior Alliance, just like Patricia Walsh, but also included Junior Red Cross, Messenger, and Budget Collector. Her remembered for is quoted as saying, quote, her lavender cookies. Looking at her pictures, she seemed more of a quiet type and maybe a little bit submissive. And these two disappeared and their bodies were later found. Amanda and I both remember and respect these victims and their families.
The DA, Edmund Dennis, he was known for making inflammatory statements. Just want to put that out there off the top. He said that all of their hearts were cut out and that there were teeth marks all over their bodies. and evidence of necrophilia. They also found a rope covered in red stains wrapped around a large tree at the burial site, along with pill bottles scattered close by. Patricia Walsh was cut in half at the waist. Marianne Wysocki had been decapitated and her head was found in a plastic bag, and Cindy Monson was found buried under Patricia Walsh and Marianne Wysocki.
The Volkswagen Bug that Patricia Walsh and Marianne Wysocki were driving was last seen parked behind the cemetery along the dirt road. It was reported by a local man, and I believe his son was with him. When the police went to investigate this, the bug was gone. They did find a torn up Volkswagen user manual, and it was nearby, and they were able to retrieve Tony's fingerprints from that. Tony Costa had a storage unit registered in his name in Burlington, Vermont, and the bug was later found parked there. He had previously inquired about having the bug painted.
Tony Costa was questioned and he provided what was known as a fishy bill of sale, basically a fancy receipt or invoice. He said the girls sold it to him and went off to have an abortion in Canada. It was then that he was arrested. Once he was arrested, investigators did a little math. The bodies that were found all underneath his quote-unquote garden was his personal pot patch, and he stashed other drugs in this same area.
They then searched his residence and found a large amount of rope, which somehow had large red stains all over it. I mean, it's a huge coincidence that there just so happened to be a rope exactly like this, tied around a large tree near the cemetery where all of this, took place.
They also found Wysocki and Walsh's belongings in his closet, where he had told the landlady he was just holding them for them. It's found that Tony's stories would often change, and why wouldn't it? That's pretty typical in the cases where we have covered, and the stories will change. He would implicate a couple of his friends who were indeed innocent. Also, his mother, who continued to dote on her son. In the book, she was frequently references him to, quote-unquote, my Tony or my Antone. Presents a letter to the police that is addressed to Tony that came from New York. It was evidently from Walsh and Wysocki. This was delivered around mid-March, about 6 weeks after their disappearance.
So, the attorney, Edmund Dennis, would say things such as, quote, the hearts of each girl had been removed from the bodies and were not in the graves. Each body was cut into as many parts as there are joints. End quote. He also was noted as saying, quote, there's evidence of cannibalism, and that the heads were removed. It's been believed that these statements were made to encourage sensationalism and thought to be some silent plot to bring him more clients. I mean, that's debatable, but it's still worth mentioning.
Although Wysocki's head was found in a plastic bag, and she had been indeed decapitated, the statements were still found as inflammatory, as nobody else's head was missing, and that cannibalism wasn't even yet confirmed. Also, the whole hearts ripped out thing, even though some organs were reportedly missing, that statement was found to be completely off base and untrue. Basically, the DA was trying to piss everyone off. Personally, I can empathize with the DA in that moment because, at this point, the law is in their hands. Tony isn't cooperating, his mom surely isn't helping things, and there are missing women they want answers for. So, I get it.
But, with all of this, it still resulted in a massive media frenzy, and, we all know that this can, complicate things. Look at what's going on currently and what's all the recent events, for example. So the chief of Truro police is quoted as saying, quote, the press is bad, but the tourists are worse. This was because tourists would show up in the off season, they'd bring their families, they'd set up shop to have a picnic, and then they'd bring their shovels, set up, get ready to help, find evidence and even more bodies. So, I mean, I totally get that this can be irritating. The conversation regarding ethics and true crime has been going on technically since the late 60s, if you think about it. Also, I totally understand the want to help, but sometimes there are more appropriate ways to help. But, I'm not going to get into all of that right here. We'll get back to the facts.
It was confirmed that Tony did have intercourse with each of the confirmed after they died. The way their bodies were found, cut up and disjointed, was described as methodical, like the way a taxidermist would do to prepare an animal to be stuffed. One source said that from a psychological point of view, this was his way of 100% owning his victims. I mean, what better way to own someone than to disjoint their body into several pieces? It was also described that when Tony was taken to the burial site, that he looked as though he was admiring his work, like he was proud.
So now we can move on to the psychiatric evaluation. So, March 31st, 1969, Tony Costa has his first psych eval at Bridgewater State Hospital. It's noted that, although polite, he still didn't cooperate. He was diagnosed there with schizoid personality. It's important to note here that schizoid personality is not to be confused with schizophrenia, schizotypal personality disorder, schizoaffective disorder, or antisocial personality disorder. According to Wikipedia, which is a source that I hate using, but I'm going to use it here, schizoid personality disorder is a personality disorder characterized by a lack of interest in social relationships, a tendency towards a solitary or sheltered lifestyle, secretiveness, emotional coldness, detachment, and apathy. Affected individuals may be unable to form intimate attachments to others and simultaneously possess a rich and elaborate but exclusively internal fantasy world.
Other associated features included stilted speech, a lack of deriving enjoyment from most activities, feeling as though one is an observer rather than a participant in life, an inability to tolerate emotional expectations of others, apparent indifference when praised or criticized, a degree of asexuality, a peculiar moral or political beliefs. Symptoms typically start in late childhood or adolescence. A more layman's version of this, per the Mayo Clinic, schizoid personality disorder is an uncommon condition in which people avoid social activities and consistently shy away from interaction with others. They also have a very limited range of emotional expression.
Now, Tony had a second psych eval and was determined to be a quote-unquote sexually dangerous man capable of murder, and was also declared a modern-day Marquis de Sade, who was an 18th century French writer known for erotica that depicted sexual fantasies that took strong emphasis on sexual violence and suffering, and blasphemy against Christianity. He became well known for making those fantasies real with both consensual and non-consenting people.
Now, for the confession and trial. Tony Costa confessed to the murder of Marianne Wysocki. In fact, he made many false confessions and failed a bunch of polygraphs, but made one official confession, which was stated above. Prior to the trial, Kurt Vonnegut, who was a well-known American author, talked about his daughter, Edith, who had partied quite a bit in P-Town at the age of 19. He recalls that it's incredibly lucky that she had declined any of Tony's advances, some of which were invites to his garden, because she could have easily been another victim.
Vonnegut also recalled that, per Edith, if Tony really was the murderer, that anyone could be the murderer, which drives my point home that a murderer or offender can slide under the radar looking like even just you or me. Vonnegut also pretty much believed in a way that Tony was framed, like he basically half-heartedly expressed disbelief that, he would do such a thing. He said that chopping up 4 girls as an act of revenge seemed a bit far-fetched. Now, 1 year prior to all of this, Tony had given the names of some dope dealers and they were arrested. I'm assuming from this report that he was trying to pin some murders on them, because that's what I also remember from the book.
May 6th, 1970 is when the trial began. Edmund Dennis, the inflammatory DA we mentioned earlier, made no attempt to provide or prove a motive. Quote, "Who knows why anyone would do such a thing?" End quote. During the trial, a polite and kind of weird but otherwise unassuming Tony Costa became cold and arrogant, always having this know-it-all attitude, and would focus only on his own note-taking and inconsistent on making his own statements.
I imagine it was like watching condensation freeze on your windshield. That's just insane. He would make long and drawn-out dissertations on the many horrible things drugs can do. It's almost like saying that, the gun's gonna grow legs and get up and walk around and do all the killing. Not the person holding the gun, The drugs did it. I had no involvement, but the drugs absolutely did do it. As his statement was incredibly long, it also was noted to be articulate and rational. So you'd think that this was a good thing for Costa, but fortunately, this made it hard to prove insanity in the case that he would plead insanity. So basically, he's smart, but he's no Einstein.
The defense lawyer blamed Costa's action on drug use, which his ex-wife also testified on his behalf. The jury was required to tour the gravesite. Around this time, Tony's mother dies from a cerebral hemorrhage, right before the conclusion of the trial. I'm no doctor, and I'm not trying to pin blame on the mother here, but I imagine that either she was experiencing a form of natural causes, or that she was under so much stress that she had to bottle it up and ended up having a cerebral hemorrhage from stress as a result.
Right. And that stress would be linked to knowing a lot more than she puts on. But again, we're not doctors. That's just what we're theorizing. Either way, it's sad that she passed away, but it's also interesting how she passes away right before the conclusion of the trial. But anyway, on May 29th, 1970, Tony Costa was convicted of the murders of Patricia Walsh, Marianne Wysocki, Susan Perry, and Sidney Monson. It's absolutely believed that he had murdered up to 8 women, but only the 4 were proven. He was sentenced to life in prison in Walpole, Massachusetts.
Tony Costa started out by living it up in his cell by stocking up on books on sadism, the occult, and ritual magic. He also wrote a memoir titled Resurrection, basically explaining his side of things. Courtney dove deep into this case in the first place, and I remember she had said that she tried to find this memoir, but we don't know where or how to find it. So if any of you have any hookups to this memoir, just know how to find the interview clips, please, to hook us up. Courtney has been searching everywhere.
Yes, please help your girl out. Anyway, but basically, Tony had this friend he named Carl, who was the friend of his that nobody had ever heard of or even met. He was never mentioned prior to this memoir, but anyway, he goes on to say that Carl dismembered Perry and Monson's bodies after they died of a drug overdose and buried them, and that Carl only made Tony aware after the fact. Tony then said that Carl shot Wysocki and Walsh while on Dilaudid and LSD. Tony then portrays himself as a hero, saying that he subdued Carl, and then in an act of heroic bravery, stabbed Wysocki to put her out of her misery because she wasn't dead yet. Then together, both Carl and Tony buried their bodies.
Tony was found at 8 p.m. on May 12, 1974, hanging via a leather belt. He was 29 years old, and it is said that he pissed all over himself. Courtney found the next paragraph from our Murderpedia source, and care to do the honors of reading that?
Of course. Thank you. It goes on to say, quote, on Sunday, May 12th, 1974, a Walpole corrections officer making a routine tear check at 8:10 p.m. discovered Antone Costa hanging by the neck from a woven leather belt knotted around the upper bars of his cell. Costa's eyes bulged open. His darkly modeled face was frozen in a grotesque mask. Blood foamed against his gaping lips from his having bitten his tongue nearly in half. One unlaced sneaker had been kicked off during his death struggles, revealing a mended white sock. Costa had urinated down the front of his unpressed prison trousers. Medical examiner Harold L. Schenker certified that Antone Charles Costa had died of asphyxiation by hanging, suicide. Costa was 29 years old.
Good riddance. He was buried in an unmarked grave next to his mommy in Provincetown. It's said that Tony never actually confessed to the murders unless you follow the belief that suicide is a confession, which is a belief held by Daniel Webster, that the closest he ever came to a confession was that autobiography Tony Costa had written. To this day, Tony Costa's garden is known as a quote-unquote tourist trap, and it is believed that satanic rituals take place here.
So remember Kurt Vonnegut? We mentioned him earlier. Anyways, he recalled a sick joke told to him by a local architect. Quote, Tony Costa walked into a Cadillac agency in Hyannis and priced an El Dorado. It'll cost you an arm and a leg, said the salesman. And Tony Costa said, it's a deal. So that is the story of Tony Costa and all the horrific shit that he did. This research has taken me a long time, but this is the one murderer I am the most intrigued by. I don't mean that I think Tony Costa is cool. I mean that you look at his high school picture, you don't see any sense of darkness or meanness or anything like that. You actually see kindness and someone you'd copy off of their exam. But learning of all of the horrific things that he has done and seeing his whole personality shift when, he was caught, it's just a testament to the fact that the mind is really quite mysterious and scary. You truly never know what's going on in there. That's just bizarre to me.
See, this is why true crime is fascinating. What the hell are all these people thinking?
Right?
Why are they being turned on by some of this stuff?
Yeah.
Is it really a nature versus nurture thing? Or is it due to head injuries at a young age?
Probably.
Or do they take too many bath salts and zombie out?
Yeah.
These are all questions we are curious to know the answers to.
Especially the bath salts part.
Yes. Ugh. I mean, it's not like we think Bundy or Gacy or whoever else are awesome. We don't. We think they're disgusting, but we still would like to know why, and also see signs of this potentially happening with someone else we know.
I mean, I think it's safe to say that sometimes a muddy swimming pool on a hot summer day is just as enticing. True crime is that muddy swimming pool on a hot summer day. Amanda, do you have an ending quote before we sign off?
Ooh, I do.
Okay, what is it?
All right, ready?
No.
All right. You must be the change you wish to see in the world.
Chris Rock.
No.
Will Smith.
What? No.
Oscar the Grouch.
No, it was actually Gandhi.
Oh, okay. I was not at all close. So don't forget that, we do have that True Crime Podcast Festival in Dallas. It's August 26th through 28th of 2022. All those 20s. We should have a table and some merch. So, if someone makes a joke at your wife's expense, please don't run up and smack them in the face. Because, I get that you want to defend your wife, but, we're going to be talking true crime, not, Oscar's violence, which could eventually turn into a true crime, and you could very well end up an episode. We want to avoid that because we've got enough on our plates, guys.
Yeah, don't do that. And we are a week late with that joke, but also speaking of merch, we have merch in our store.
Yeah,
our website. Yeah, I mean, come on. Our website isn't working right now, but hit our link tree in the show notes, and there you'll find our YouTube, Patreon, social media links, and of course, our merch store.
I think it's really funny that you said we have merch in our store. It's like, yeah, because if we had a store without merch, then what is it? It's just an empty store. It's like the ending of Superstore, which is a good show, by the way. But
all right, so I guess it would be we have a merch store.
Yeah. So we also got a new review.
Ooh.
Yeah, this one's from KDubs82 on Apple Podcasts. They go on to say 5 stars, and they titled it "Keep It Up, Ladies."
Ooh. They also said, quote, "I have been binging and loving this pod. Great storytelling and banter." And a little red heart emoji. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah,
Sweet.
we love you. Also, if you want to join our Patreon, KDubs 82. We're poor, so we will be fine with that. But,
yes, please.
But even if not, like, we still love you. You know, especially since,
of course.
Yeah.
We love all of our people.
So, yeah, but be sure to leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you can, you know, leave them. You know, it really does help get our visibility out there.
Yes, please. So one more bit of news, y'all. We are now partnered with Spreaker, and we could not be more freaking excited. Spreaker. All right, well, that's all we have for you today, folks.
Don't be a dick.
And wear deodorant.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to A Nefarious Nightmare. All research done for this podcast, depending on the episode, is written by Amanda Cronin and Courtney Fenner. Scripting, editing, mastering, and sound design are done by Courtney Fenner. If you would like to visit our links, merch store, or social media, please either go to www.anefariousnightmare.com or to our link tree. That's linktr.ee/A Nefarious Nightmare Podcast. Music used for our intro and exit is by Ghost Stories Incorporated. You may find their music at bandcamp.com. Additional backing music for today's episode was provided by Epidemic Sound. Please consider leaving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts to help us expand our audience. Thank you very much for listening, and take care.